The geopolitical landscape of the Eastern Front appears to have entered a phase of profound volatility, characterized by what military analysts increasingly interpret as a determined and overwhelming Russian strategic push to consolidate control over the Pokrovsk-Mirnograd axis. The shift in momentum, which has been accumulating over recent weeks, seems to have culminated in a catastrophic strategic loss for Ukrainian forces, the full implications of which are only now becoming clear. While official Kyiv sources maintain a degree of operational integrity in the contested region, mounting evidence from geolocated footage and independent reporting suggests that the situation for the Ukrainian Armed Forces, or AFU, in Mirnograd has deteriorated past a critical tipping point, shifting from a planned defense into a protracted siege and potential annihilation. The strategic importance of this development cannot be overstated, as the fall of the nearby major hub, Pokrovsk, is widely believed to be an operational fait accompli, leaving the city of Mirnograd critically exposed and effectively encircled. The confirmation, reportedly via Russian military video feeds and subsequently assessed by Western experts, that Russian armed forces now control the village of Rivne, a small but geographically crucial locale situated directly between the two major urban centers, is indicative of the success of the encirclement strategy. The seizure of Rivne appears to have effectively secured the bottleneck or gateway to the final ring of the siege, fundamentally disrupting the already tenuous supply lines that Kiev was striving to maintain. Although Captain Grigory Shapoval, a spokesperson for the AFU's Eastern Front, has publicly challenged the narrative of complete encirclement, asserting that specific northern logistical arteries are still operational for supplying units in both Pokrovsk and Mirnograd, the consensus among external military observers is that the established supply routes are now so heavily interdicted or vulnerable to overwhelming fire control that they offer little substantive relief. The sheer scale of the Russian commitment to this operation strongly suggests Moscow's intent to completely flatten this sector of the front. Independent military assessments universally point to a severe and perhaps unprecedented disparity in troop numbers and materiel, a force ratio that many within the beleaguered Ukrainian ranks have described as fundamentally untenable. Reports estimate that the RAFAF has committed a vast operational reserve, potentially encompassing multiple combined arms armies, numbering between 110,000 and 140,000 personnel. This concentration of force stands against an estimated 15,000 AFU defenders, who were initially deployed to the Pokrovsk-Mirnograd region over the past month and a half. This imbalance establishes a ratio of nearly 1 Ukrainian defender for every 10 Russian attackers, a numerical superiority that is compounded by decisive Russian advantages in air superiority, munition stockpiles, and the capability for frequent troop rotation. The tactical reality on the ground in Mirnograd seems to be defined by this severe resource disparity.
Ukrainian military personnel on the front line have voiced extreme frustration, characterizing the defense less of a military strategy and more of a voluntary sacrifice. One soldier reportedly confided that attempting to hold a position with 15,000 against a force almost 10 times its size, especially one enjoying overwhelming artillery and aerial firepower, is likely a plan for self-destruction rather than defense.
This hypothesis is supported by increasing visual evidence of the devastating impact of heavy guided munitions, specifically the use of Fab 1500 glide bombs, which footage confirms have struck and obliterated hardened Ukrainian positions within the city limits. This superiority is further exacerbated at the micro level by the ubiquitous presence of Russian FPV drones, which, according to reports from groups closely linked to Ukrainian military intelligence, have made virtually any visible movement within the city streets a potentially fatal risk. The internal operational challenges facing the AFU defense units appear to be almost as detrimental as the external threat. Communications from commanders within the besieged pocket, such as those emanating from elements of the 79th Brigade, detail a descent into operational chaos. One commander's report painted a harrowing picture of the western outskirts of the city, describing conditions as hell, where casualties are mounting not merely from enemy fire, but from the lack of timely medical evacuation.
More critically, the reports emphasize a severe lack of operational coordination with neighboring units and, perhaps most disturbingly, a perception that necessary support from higher command structures has entirely evaporated. It is alleged that despite the rapid degradation of defensive lines and the increasing probability of total collapse, the beleaguered units have not been granted orders to commence a coordinated withdrawal, leading to a grim scenario where soldiers are simply left to perish in their positions.
Compounding these immediate threats is the critical depletion of essential supplies, ammunition, food, water, and crucially, first aid materials, meaning the defense has devolved into a slow process of attrition and survival under continuous fire rather than organized resistance. The central dilemma now appears to reside at the highest political echelon. According to unconfirmed reports stemming from sources within the presidential office, the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, General Alexander Syrskyi, had apparently briefed President Volodymyr Zelensky on the dire situation, confirming the complete operational encirclement and noting that 117 attempted counterattacks aimed at breaking the siege had failed. The General's Council reportedly advised an immediate order to evacuate the remaining units to prevent their certain annihilation. However, in a decision that underscores the profound political and morale implications of losing Mirnograd, President Zelensky reportedly issued a counter-directive to hold the city to the very end.
One hypothesis suggests that this directive stems from a political necessity to avoid signaling further large-scale collapse following the likely loss of Pokrovsk, potentially aiming to tie up Russian operational reserves or buy crucial time for fortifications elsewhere, regardless of the staggering human cost.
It is plausible that this command, while politically understandable in terms of maintaining national resolve, has placed the remaining few thousand defenders, now reportedly fewer than 1,000 resolute troops from the original contingent, into a scenario where safe withdrawal is no longer feasible, meaning their complete eradication by the overwhelming Russian central grouping of forces is an almost certain outcome, expected potentially before the middle of the current month.
The confirmation of the Russian armed forces' control over Rivne village, verified by geolocated footage, acted as the crucial piece of evidence that substantiated the wider narrative of the Pokrovsk collapse and the resultant isolation of Mirnograd. Rivne, strategically situated between the two urban centers, served as the literal bottleneck that sealed the fate of the remaining logistics corridor, effectively transforming the encirclement from a threat into a concrete reality.
While Captain Grigory Shapoval, speaking for the AFU's Eastern Front, officially refuted these claims, insisting that Ukrainian forces maintained control over the northern areas of Pokrovsk and had established alternative supply lines, one must cautiously weigh the official denial, likely intended for tactical obfuscation or morale maintenance, against the grim realities reported by independent Western analysts such as Julian Repke, who definitively pronounced Pokrovsk fallen and estimate over 1,000 Ukrainian troops trapped within the final Mirnograd perimeter.
The speed with which the situation deteriorated following the closure of this bottleneck suggests that the operational effectiveness of any purported alternative logistical routes was at best marginal, and likely incapable of sustaining a defense against the overwhelming force being arrayed against the city.
This catastrophic disparity in force concentration is perhaps the most defining feature of the battle, with observers estimating the Russian commitment at between 110,000 and 140,000 troops across multiple army groupings, establishing a crushing 10-to-1 ratio against the approximately 15,000 Ukrainian defenders initially deployed to the Pokrovsk-Mirnograd axis. It is plausible that the commitment of this sizable, though ultimately insufficient, contingent was intended not to secure a victory, but rather to execute a time-buying operation, a bloody delaying action to draw down Russian resources and secure defensive lines further west. However, as one beleaguered Ukrainian soldier reportedly lamented, facing an enemy with decisive air superiority, unlimited ammunition, and regular replacements, such an operation ceases to be a defense plan and arguably becomes a self-destructive maneuver, especially when faced with the near-constant pounding by guided heavy ordnance, such as the confirmed use of Fab 1500 glide bombs, which demonstrated the enemy's capability to swiftly eradicate fortified Ukrainian positions.
The inherent hopelessness of this tactical situation generated the most contentious element surrounding the overall command structure, namely the reported disagreement between Commander-in-Chief General Alexander Syrskyi and President Volodymyr Zelensky. According to internal sources, General Syrskyi, having witnessed 117 failed counterattack attempts to break the cordon, advised the president that an immediate tactical withdrawal was critical to preserve the remaining units, now numbering below 1,000 effective combatants, from total annihilation.
The military logic of this council is unassailable. Preventing the complete erasure of experienced troops is paramount in a war of attrition. Yet the report suggests President Zelensky issued an unambiguous order to hold the city to the last man. One hypothesis suggests that maintaining the fight in Mirnograd, however unsustainable, provides a necessary political shield, buying invaluable time for consolidating defensive lines further back, and preventing the political fallout that a rapid collapse might entail, echoing previous commands to defend besieged cities against overwhelming odds. The counter-argument, however, is that this decision, born of political necessity, guarantees the loss of highly valuable, highly motivated personnel through attrition and lack of timely medical evacuation, severely compromising Ukraine's long-term defensive capacity. This command tension translated directly into the hellish reality faced by the trapped soldiers, as detailed by multiple frontline reports. Cooperation between units was fragmented, and the already thin supply chain crumbled completely under sustained Russian interdiction. Logistical resupply became almost entirely dependent on heavy multi-rotor drones, which themselves became easy targets for Russian anti-air and FPV UAVs, leading to critical shortages of ammunition, water, food, and crucial first aid supplies. As military observers noted, any movement within the city streets risked immediate engagement by Russian FPV drones, transforming the defense into a slow, deliberate process of survival under continuous fire rather than a cohesive military operation. Given the complete absence of a functional resupply line, the massive fire superiority held by the Russian central grouping of forces, and the political decision overriding tactical withdrawal, the conflict loop is tragically resolved. The complete collapse of Mirnograd appears inevitable, likely occurring before the middle of this month, confirming the fears of those who saw the commitment of troops under a 1-to-10 ratio as a self-fulfilling prophecy of military defeat. This particular battle will likely be analyzed for years to come, serving as a stark illustration of the brutal intersection where military necessity clashes violently with political will, and ultimately highlighting the immense human cost incurred when the strategic objective shifts from victory to merely buying time, regardless of the consequences for the soldiers on the ground. The analysis and commentary provided in this video are based on publicly available sources and represent the channel's own perspective on the current military developments and their likely strategic outcomes.